Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Sword Art Online video. In this one I want to talk about the upcoming Sword Art Online movie, Sword Art Online Progressive Aria of a Starless Night. So this is going to be the way they're continuing the anime post-alization, not by covering the content that chronologically happens afterwards, which is Moon Cradle and then Unital Ring. Instead, they're going back to adapt some of Progressive, which covers in more detail the Aincrad arc. So that's really, really good. While Unital Ring is still in its early stages, I think it makes sense to go back and cover all of this stuff, which is obviously the arc people really care about, that got us into the series in such a big way. It's such a cool idea, the Aincrad arc, but it's also the most awkwardly written of all of the SAO arcs because of how it was done, both in terms of originally in the light novel as well as how they then did it in the anime. The two volumes that make up the Aincrad arc pretty much just hit the main beats and you get like none of the floors. Most of the anime is utilizing these side stories that come out of the some volumes that happen afterwards down the line, and some progressive stuff, in that the whole first floor boss fight is a progressive piece of content that is not in SAO volume 1 or 2. It's in Progressive volume 1, specifically the story Aria of a Starless Night. So that's very interesting that like anyone who has seen the anime is familiar with some of Progressive and some of what this story is going to be, but not all of it because of how they chose to do the adaptation, which mainly would amount to the fact that the anime, the way they did it, was that they basically got across the idea that Kirito and Asuna meet for the first time at the meeting ahead of the first floor boss fight, when actually within the same story they got that scene from. At the start, they cover where Kirito and Asuna like properly meet for the first time. They just didn't do that in the anime. So there's some weird stuff going on here, just with regards to like these multiple ways that they told the very early section of the story. But now this looks like it's going to be sort of the definitive retelling of the start of SAO. So that's good. So you can see just above me here, this is the sort of new poster that they have getting across that it's going to be autumn 2021 when it is released. And you can see Asuna there looking cool, Kirito of course, and then who's this new character here who is on the cover for the movie? The poster for the movie. That is Mito, who is a new character who isn't in either the light novel of Progressive or the manga for Progressive. Completely new character here for this anime movie, and it even says that in the trailer that this is going to be sort of new canon content basically from Reiki Kawahara, like a new arc basically. So that's kind of interesting that they're not just deciding to adapt this stuff accurately, they're actually adding in even more. And I think it makes sense. There's definitely going to be a need to fill out a movie-length feature just covering the story that is Aria of a Starless Night. I definitely think you need a little bit more, especially with Asuna as the focus. You, I think, need a little bit more edge, emotion from her side of things to make the movie work as good as you think it should work. But let's get into explaining some of this stuff. So the most recent update that we have is the website updated, and it gave an official description for this movie. Most of it I think you'll probably be familiar with. So this is a story of the Flash and the Black Swordsman before they had earned these nicknames. When Asuna Yuki happened to put on the nerve gear, she was just a middle school third year who would normally have had nothing to do with online games. The game master made the following proclamation: "This may be a game, but it is not something that you play. Your death in-game will lead to your death in the real world. Hearing this, all the players descended into a state of chaos, engulfing the game in pandemonium. One such player was Asuna, but she decided to embark on clearing Aincrad, the floating castle of steel, despite not even knowing the rules of the world or having the end of her journey in sight. As Asuna tries to survive in a world where death was a constant companion, she will have a fateful encounter as well as a parting. As Asuna valiantly fights on, despite being at the mercy of the reality before her, she meets Kirito, the solo swordsman. So these last two sentences are probably like the main takeaway here. So Asuna will have a fateful encounter and a parting from someone. Now, an encounter obviously is Kirito, because in this case it's the story of how do they meet for the first time and the significance of that. So the encounter could be Kirito, but the encounter could also be Mito, because from the trailer you get the sense that Mito and Asuna at some point are close, and Asuna has a whole section of the story before she meets Kirito that likely is with Mito, which we'll get into I think in a minute. So I think the encounter and parting potentially are the same character, and that is Mito, the person who first helped her, but also the first person who sort of left Asuna. We'll see exactly what the character arc they're going to go for with Mito is, but looking at it, it seems like Mito at some point leaves Asuna, and we'll see what happens there. And then she meets Kirito, and we get the progressive situation where Kirito and Asuna are together, up to the point where at some point Kirito and Asuna go their separate ways and then only come back together because of the whole murder in the safe zone situation and their like arguments that they have at boss meetings and stuff like that. As we sort of saw in the anime, that section happens. But yeah, I think at this point, one final thing to do before we get into the screenshots. The reason we know the character's name is Mito is that the website updated with the description that I just read out there, but also with some kind of character portraits, and they did include the character's name here. So that's how we know Mito. I believe this just translates to Sword Art Online player, and that is the voice actress, I believe. So there's that. No details specifically about the character. So let's get into some of these shots here. Again, most of the trailer is just shots that we've seen before. We've seen the boss fight with the first floor boss, Ilfang the Cobalt Lord. We've seen it before. So we know who Diavel is, we know who Kabao is, and so on. There's no need for me to go over the reshots basically of those scenes here. Instead, we're going to focus sort of on the new scenes and the stuff that we haven't seen already adapted in the anime. So this first shot, immediately what I'll say is that I don't believe this line of dialogue here actually happens in this scene. This is right at the start of the trailer as it starts to go into sort of the more action shots, and I think this line is more of a holdover from a section just a few seconds before, in that I don't think Asuna is actually speaking in this exact shot that I have here paused. It's just the way the subtitles were put over the trailer, not necessarily, you know, covering what's actually happening in the scene. But what's interesting is trying to sort of keep track of at what point in the story is this at. This is not super early for Asuna, because you can see that she has slightly better gear than she has when she first logs in, as evidenced by the main thing that you can tell is the difference is that she's wearing leggings in some scenes, she's not wearing them in other scenes. I think the starter gear doesn't have leggings, so this speaks to the fact that she's upgraded her gear a little bit. So this isn't like the second Asuna logs in she encounters this. Instead, this is a bit after some stuff has happened. Now, whether this is after she meets Kirito and is doing training with him, or if this is her sort of side adventure thing she has earlier on with Mito, it's not particularly clear. What I think it is that this is where we get into the difference between the light novel version of the story and the manga version of the story, which basically amounts to the fact that I'd say that the novel is sort of like half and half from Kirito's perspective versus Asuna's perspective. The manga is like pretty much all Asuna's perspective. And I think a lot of the shots here are more representative of the manga, because some of this stuff that happens here you don't actually see happen in the light novel. And what I mean by this is that there's one very brief shot where they cover Asuna against sort of plant-like monsters. I probably should have had this bookmarked before I did the video. But yeah, again, it's just one panel. You can't really tell particularly clearly, but you can see at the top of the page here, that roughly looks like some sort of a plant-like monster. And then, obviously, she's wearing different clothing here. This is with Argo and Kirito. This is where she defeats some of these monsters and gets the drop of a new sword. So that's kind of interesting, that as I'll cover in a minute, her sword is obviously different from the starter rapier to the one that she uses in the boss fight. So it could be that this could also be a section kind of in an in-between point, like sort of when she's with Mito but maybe Mito's not around. These two scenes here could also be like stem one into the next. It's kind of unclear. Now, this scene, I think, you can match it up, I think, with a scene from the manga very clearly. Because immediately what happens prior to Kirito landing in front of this thing is that he's jumped over Asuna. And it doesn't seem like in this scene Asuna is aware of who Kirito is. So this is before they even have their proper meeting. And I think it stems off this early section in the manga, in that, like, you see, it's on the color pages. She encounters this sort of like boar-like monster, which sort of resembles this. They might have given it a redesign. But as you progress later on in the story and find out why she was in this situation, it was this rumor of a rumored logout spot in the game, a hidden place where, even though logout is disabled, you might be able to log out. So she follows this rumor trying to get out and encounters this boar-like creature, which basically is about to kill her. She feels she's going to die. But, and this is the key thing here in terms of similarity, Kirito hops over her and slices the monster in half. So are they going to do something like that, where Kirito hops over her, basically takes this thing out, basically in the shot we don't see in the trailer, and then walks off? Because what happens in the manga is that Kirito basically walks off. He doesn't really see Asuna there. And then Argo, this is when Argo, who's with Kirito, walks over to Asuna and meets her for the first time and starts up their friendship. Because that's the thing. I don't think we see Argo in either trailer, but Argo is going to have to play some role in this story. And she's sort of been the forgotten character in the anime. So I really hope they actually bring her in properly again. So that would be really cool to see. Because I think that is roughly what this scene is, which is that, you know, Asuna has some experience at this point, but Kirito steps in and sort of saves her before she even knows it's properly him. And then potentially, like, after this, she meets Mito and gets better. And then Mito leaves, and then we have the scene in the first floor labyrinth where Asuna is basically sort of almost like planning her death. She's kind of in a way like given up, of like, no, the last thing I can do is die in the way I want, because I'm not allowed to live in the way that I want in this game. So I think that's the rough explanation of these two scenes, is that like this might be where she, you know, trains with Kirito and gets the new sword from, and this might be when Kirito saves her much earlier on. Here, this character, this is Mito, basically. Look at the sort of leggings or big boots that this character is wearing. I was wondering this for a while, but then I realized the similarity of, like, look at the kind of purple into white here and the design. Look at the purple into white here. It's pretty much the same. So this is Mito here, who's hopping behind Asuna. So my guess is that Mito will be initially introduced, and she's probably trying to maybe come across as a guy, so she sort of hides the fact that she's a girl. Because because of course the population, there's much more guy players than there is girl players, so you understand why she would want to do that. They also revealed that she basically is a beta tester from the game, so she'd be really experienced and know what to do. The question obviously in this scene is more of like, why does Mito randomly target Asuna? Because you can see this is like right there, Town of Beginnings, really early on in the game. This might be like immediately after the Kayaba announcement, or maybe even before that, we don't actually know. But this scene of Mito without the mask and I guess some sort of a wig maybe that she's wearing, does proclaim we have to get stronger so we can clear the game as soon as possible. Which is kind of interesting in that Asuna more or less makes the thing of like, I'm going to try my best to clear the game. I'm going to drive towards that at all possible. But ultimately she's sort of accepting of her death in the scene where ultimately she starts her kind of partnership with Kirito in the first floor labyrinth. So the big question is really, how are they going to tie Mito into Asuna's sort of character arc, which, based on the manga and the light novel, is more of that sense for like her backstory of like the pressure that's put on her by like her mother primarily, and that, you know, she didn't do as well in school the last time, and you know, she thinks she's not going to have the perfect career path. She's got all that pressure, so she plays this game, but something really bad happens and she feels that it's an embarrassment for her family that she's trapped in this game, and if this has happened to her, all she can do is die on her own terms, basically. How do we get from her potentially having a strong friendship or partnership with Mito, then working together, to her on her own, basically camping out in the middle of the first floor dungeon, not buying any potions, just multiple swords in case they break, and just fighting and fighting and fighting until Kirito eventually saves her when she collapses from exhaustion, which is what happens in Progressive. This is why Mito could add a lot to the story, but there is also the potential that she might detract from the story, in that if she becomes a third wheel in some of these scenes that we're excited for, that might take away from it. Do we want her getting in the middle of Kirito Asuna scenes? Not really. Do we want her potentially replacing Argo in certain scenes? I don't think so. So they really have to, I think, make this stuff fit in nicely, where it's separate enough from everything else, but it still fits in nicely with everything as well. So, what's unique about her, and it's kind of weird, this is the one screenshot I could get that showed it. The weapon that she uses, I thought it was a staff initially, but it's actually a scythe, which I barely even knew was actually a weapon players could use in SAO. But it clearly is, as you can see there. It's kind of got a like energy blade to it. As well as that, first floor, and she does like looks like a 5-6 hit combo attack. Now, beta tester, of course, the idea is that like Kirito can also do some pretty decent combo attacks even on the first floor. Not quite that extreme, but I guess that might be significant of like her specialized weapon and so on. But either way, that's a cool little action scene. She has a unique weapon. That's interesting. I initially was maybe thinking of like, oh, new character. Is she a fencer? Maybe she's the one who teaches Asuna how to do linear really well. But no, it seems like Asuna just adapts really well to linear, which is why Kirito's impressed with it when they first meet. And then this obviously is a pretty interesting scene. And like, it's a Kirito and Asuna scene. Mito's not around, but they're clearly talking about Mito. In that he's not really talking about himself here. He's like, it doesn't matter if you're a beta tester or not. You know what kind of person she is. So he's clearly referencing the fact that Mito is a beta tester, which I think would explain her sort of power level. And we see Asuna and Mito hugging here, but also that they're separate from each other, but Mito's still alive. You're the only one who knows what kind of person she actually is. So this gets into the idea of Egil at the first boss floor meeting sort of diffused a lot of the pressure that was on beta testers from the regular population. I'm guessing part of the angle they're going to go with here is that Mito does not handle the pressure placed on the beta testers very well, because I think they established that like a surprising amount of the beta testers actually died early in SAO once it became a game of death because of some of the changes in the game. So that's the significance behind Kirito becoming the, you know, beater, not just the beta tester, but the beater of the game, the beta tester above all beta testers, was to get across the idea that, yeah, beta testers might have a slight edge on normal players, but nothing like this cheater guy over here, the beta tester cheater, Kirito. So I'm guessing that's part of the angle that they're going with here, is that she will be a slightly different take on a beta tester character, different than Diaval and different than Kirito himself. They do need to be careful with that, though, in terms of like Kirito is going to have his own arc in terms of dealing with how he feels about himself as a beta tester, and the idea as you go through Progressive is that Kirito is constantly thinking to himself, at what point do I decide that I am actually holding Asuna back? I've taught her everything that I can. She could become one of the best players in this game. She could lead a guild. I'm the one holding her back. And he's thinking that from a relatively early point, but they stick together for floor after floor after floor. And obviously at some point they do separate. And Asuna does go on to be second in command of the Knights of the Blood Oath. Second only to the guy who made the game. So in essence, you know, she got to the point where she was effectively in one of the highest leader positions in the game. Kirito was correct in his analysis of Asuna. So what's the deal with Mito then? I'm guessing what happens is that Mito makes the decision that Kirito is going to struggle to make, but makes eventually, which is that as a beta tester, she separates herself from Asuna, who she was with earlier on, but then after maybe some controversy about beta testers, maybe they'll make more out of the meeting when Kibao has his big outburst about beta testers, and at that point Mito runs off and doesn't want to be around Asuna anymore, because it doesn't seem necessarily like it's the case that Mito just dies, which I thought was going to be the case. But no, you can see this room is the boss fight at the end, which is the end of Aria of the Starless Night. Now, she might die in the boss battle, but Diaval is the death. And I think the way it works is that he's meant to be, I think, the only... Maybe I'm misremembering this completely, but I think his death is meant to be like really significant, so it would feel a little bit weird to sort of add this new character in to die in the same way as Diaval. So I'm guessing she makes it through, maybe makes up with Asuna at the end. They have a more sort of a parting on better terms rather than I have to leave you because I'm a beta tester, but she still goes off on her own. And then if they are going to continue to do movies, or maybe after this initial movie they'll switch over to making a progressive anime series, we will see more of her show up at later points in the story. Because this is where we get into the idea of like, it would fit if she potentially was to die. That way Diaval is the death that really affects Kirito in this fight, but then Asuna is affected by the death of Mito. I'm not sure if that's necessarily the way they want to go with it, but otherwise the character survives, which I'm not really sure exactly how it goes. And then the last two screenshots are just to get across the sword upgrade that she goes through. So this is Asuna as she is in the labyrinth where Kirito finds her. So this is her during her I'll choose to die on my own terms stage, where she's just driving herself into the ground basically with her standard, you know, iron rapier. So pretty standard weapon. Then as she goes to attack in the final boss fight, you can see her rapier is very different. This is the wind floret, because it's got the green guard on it. So it highlights that, you know, she at some point gets that, and I'm thinking, like I said earlier, that this scene here, defeating these things, might be how she gets it, or it might be some other scene that we don't see. Either way, the big thing is obviously new character. Is she going to be a help to the story, or will she potentially get in the way, actually? I want to see what the run time is on this movie, because if it is going to be like a 90-minute movie, then I absolutely think we have time to develop a new character alongside the other stuff. The thing you need to realize about this is that you may think, oh, like, this is a giant book, look how thick this is. But the specific story, Aria of a Starless Night, is only 120 pages, if even that. Of this book, this section here, that's this movie. Plus some scenes, I guess, with Mito here. Only just 100 pages. The rest is like some interludes, as well as the second floor stuff. Rondo for a Fragile Blade, which I don't think they're going to go into at all, because there's no shots from it at all. This is floor 1, for sure. So the question really is just, what's the deal with Mito? In that, like, this scene here of the hug that they have, is this their initial goodbye? And why does that happen? Like I said, it probably is more related to the beta tester, because of the fact that Kirito mentions it, and Asuna clearly brings it up to Kirito with that in mind. But I wonder at all, like, how does this then maybe change the dynamic of the scene where Kirito reveals himself as a beater, which you have to have in this scene? In that, like, how she handled her dynamic with Mito, does that maybe then affect why she's so kind of completely willing to go along with Kirito and doesn't care at all that he is the beta tester of all beta testers? And she has that sort of just happy, funny reaction to him when he gets all serious with her, and it's just like, oh, I didn't see your name, even though it was like there the whole time. Like, what an idiot I am. That sort of thing. So, I wonder sort of thematically how some of this stuff is going to fully come together. I maybe be a little bit worried that we didn't really see any Argo, yet they've introduced this new character. I hope Argo isn't replaced. Because I think Argo is going to be in United Ring much more substantially than she was in any other arc. So they're at some point going to have to acknowledge that this character exists in the anime kind of story. You need to do it here. You have to do it here, because Argo ends up being really, really important. Because I think by the time you get to like volume 4 or 5 of Progressive, she's right there. She's this like secondary, third main character who teams up with Kirito and Asuna. And even this book itself, she has scenes with Kirito one-on-one. She has scenes with Asuna one-on-one, and with the two of them together. So I don't think you can really leave the character out, and I don't really see necessarily how this character is going to fully play into that. So we'll see how it goes. So yeah, we're still a bunch of months away from this. I suppose at earliest this is going to be like what, October, November, December. So we're still roughly, I suppose, 5-6 months away from this. I am very excited for it, though. The only thing is, like, with it being a movie, it means we're probably going to be way behind on getting it over here. I'm hoping maybe with the pandemic they might be a little bit better about that, because like going to see it in person might not be completely viable, and so they might make a bigger deal about like releasing it digitally or something like that. Hopefully things are better and it's not like waiting years for this. That's the only problem. If this is a normal anime, no problem, you're going to be able to see it. But because it's a movie, it immediately sort of complicates the release just a little bit. And then finally, I suppose, if they're going to continue this, can they do them all as movies? Yes, but I kind of would feel like some of them I don't think are the most suited to be movies. This first one works because you have the whole idea of Asuna's perspective coming into the game. You're introducing a new character, how she first meets Kirito, first floor boss battle. Great. The problem is that immediately in like floor 2, the plot becomes much more technical about like weapon upgrades and stuff like that. And yes, there's a lot of Kirito and Asuna stuff. There eventually is a boss battle, but it's much more getting into the weeds rather than like really like super strong character development stuff. Now, there's a lot of setup happening in the background as well, but because of that, I do feel like once you get through the first floor, an anime series probably is much more in line with what they probably should do. I think that would just allow them to just execute it better, because otherwise like you're going to get to a situation where like, what is it, the 2 most recent volumes of Progressive are like 2 volumes which take place on 1 floor. So unless they're going to cram the same amount of content into 1 movie, they're not going to do 2 movies to cover 1 floor, are they? So a series eventually, I think, has to, take over. At least that's my perspective on it. I definitely would prefer them not to just get locked into movies over and over again. And, while it's going to take still a couple of years for United Ring to be complete enough to start the arc to do that one in the anime, just make this the series, I think. Because obviously I think the release for Progressive is finally starting up again. I think volume 7 or something like that is finally about to come out in Japan, or has come out. I forget the release dates, but that will be coming out in English eventually. But it's still slow. We're still not too far in. Like, there's 75 floors to get to if the full scope of the Progressive story is they want to tell it. You got to move along a bit, and I think an anime series will help that along faster than anything. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are. How excited are you for the upcoming SAO movie? What were your thoughts on some of the stuff I had to say here about, I suppose, especially just Mito and what her involvement in this story is actually going to be. But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.